All right. Everybody hear me? Okay. Awesome. All right. Like Takuna said, my name is Eric Stamm. Senior DevOps engineer / software engineer for BLUEGRACE Logistics. I know some of you guys out there might be like, DevOps engineer is not a real thing because it's a mindset, right? Totally agree with you guys. Before we get started, I'm more of almost a consultant in the company to help us adopt cloud best practices and DevOps best practices, and kind of train the teams up on how to evolve. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how our company used Azure to help us grow, and going to explain why I'm calling us a hyper-growth company. So who is BLUEGRACE, right? So just a little bit of backstory on the company. So we're based out of Tampa, Florida, Riverview in specific, if any of you guys are familiar with that area. We are a third-party logistics company. So want to keep this tech related, but a third-party logistics company basically means we don't actually own any trucks. We're a non-asset based company. We actually are brokers for freight. So we build proprietary software. Think of us as the Expedia or the Travelocity for freight. People go on our website, they type in what they want to ship, where it's going to, and we have carrier relationships and built-in integrations with thousands of carriers across the U.S. that will find the best lane, cheapest cost, and just helps our customers save a lot of money. So we do have negotiated rates with a lot of carriers, and we have a lot of happy customers. We're also very active in the culture and community. We do things like Free Beer Fridays and ping pong, cornhole, etc. Just a cool company to work for. All right, so why are we a hyper-growth company? Here is our kind of our timeline of the last decade. So we were founded in 2009, and I won't go through everything, but you can kind of see there were a couple years starting out that we had over 100% growth, and really kind of steadied out until about 2015 to 2016. You can see we grew from 181 employees to 469 employees in a year. Now I've worked at BLUEGRACE since 2015. Actually, my 5-year is today. I've kind of seen it grow from, I want to say I was one of like the first 100 employees. So I've kind of seen it grow from, a small company into, we're trying to hit that $1 billion mark soon. And obviously to get there, right, the IT department grew tremendously, and we had to be able to scale. So we took a huge amount of equity, $255 million of private equity in 2017, and basically just the requests came pouring in from the business, right? We want it all. To now we're over 600 employees today. So if we look back, and this is a little bit before I got there, but when I came in 2015, this is the architecture that they had in place, right? So these are just kind of the highlights of what we were using. So at the time, we were using Rackspace as our cloud provider. And really, all that we had at the time was just a UI over top of a third-party system, just to make it a little bit prettier and to make something that we could sell to our customers, right? Like, we didn't want to sell a third-party system to customers, so we basically built almost a wrapper over this third-party system. So we had an MVC5 app, we had some WCF services because we wanted to start having some customers integrate into our software. One big monolith solution, single database, and also we weren't using our own, we were using a hosted TFS for us that had limited features, had some on-prem Windows services, and we were also using Team Foundation version control, which if any of you guys have used that, then you know our pain. We'll touch on that in a little bit. So why, when we got there, why did we want to shift to Azure? And I'm sure some of this will resonate with you guys. So at the time, Rackspace only supported SQL Standard. We wanted to use SQL Enterprise. We were actually one of the first to adopt the always-on high availability with the IaaS services in Azure. So we did move, we kind of did a lift and shift of our database into Azure on VMs, and it allowed us to be a little bit more resilient and take advantage of some high availability. Also, we're a .NET shop, and we knew that in the future when we grew large enough, we're going to get cost savings benefits through EA agreements, and just kind of seemed like a natural fit. So 2015, when we were proposing, this is actually our real proposed diagram of, at the time, just our small amount of applications we had. And we were like, okay, what are we going to use in Azure? How are we going to get there from Rackspace? And on the left there are kind of the services that we decided to use. So we're a heavy PaaS environment. We've kind of adopted that, like anything that's available to be a PaaS service, we're going to use it. We don't like having to manage everything and manage the infrastructure. So we use Azure App Services to host pretty much all of our APIs, all of our websites, and we're using Azure Storage, a lot of blob storage to hold things like all of our images we're getting from carriers, receipts, bill of ladings, different things like that. We're using Traffic Manager to distribute the traffic. We did use classic cloud services, which I don't know how familiar anybody here is with that, but it was that was a big lesson learned for us. They're just nasty, and I'm so glad that they're not a thing anymore. We'll touch on that a little bit later. And then we also were able to finally, sync our Active Directory from on-prem into Azure and really leverage it. So you can kind of see, like, we had actually 4 environments. So we had a dev environment, a QA, a UAT, and a prod. And again, we were using Team Foundation version control, so all of our code had to make it through all of these environments in order to get out. So our lead time was not very good. So when we moved, it was really successful when we just shifted over the single monolith, the WCF services and the MVC UI. It was awesome. We could finally scale, and we could meet our customer demand, which we had issues with in the past. Better cost management. At the time, the cost management still wasn't great, but it helped us be able to identify like our true costs for SQL versus our websites, and also test environments. If somebody said, "Hey, we need a new test environment," since we were using PaaS services, we were able to spin that up really, really quickly. And we weren't even doing it with ARM templates or anything at the time. Even provisioning it manually was only took maybe an hour or two. So lots of benefits there. So then we had some growing pains. So we grew from about 10 people in our IT department to about 25. And at the same time, right, we all used to work as one giant team, and we would do all our sprint plannings together, retros, everything. And now we split into different teams, and that hurt us a lot because we didn't have people that were dedicated Scrum Masters and knew the process on all the teams. So we needed more productivity, but things were definitely disrupted at the time. And then, the business was constantly asking for new stuff, we had to figure out, okay, so like what in Azure can we use to be able to help us grow, even faster. And then also, post TFS, right, we couldn't leverage a lot of the new features, so we actually went to a couple of workshops at the time with Nebbia before it was New Signature, and we learned about a lot of things like the build and release pipelines, internal NuGet feeds, and stuff like that. And we really wanted to take advantage of that, but we didn't have any of that in our hosted TFS solution. So that was another thing where we're like, okay, well, if we want to really be somebody who embraces like all these best practices, we need to look at other solutions. All right, so we made a transition to VSTS at the time. So we got all those features, right, and we didn't have to worry about all the versions and everything anymore. The next one here, I want to say this is probably one of the top things that helped our productivity of all time. Redgate DLM tools. So I can't say enough good things about Redgate, and being able to finally get our database into source control and use their tools to be able to actually have like pipelines deploying our code to the database was just monumental in productivity. Being able to branch for different projects we were working on, I mean, we were able to fully isolate it and keep it, very well organized. It was just great, and our relationship with them has only grown in the past couple of years. And again, I can't say enough good things about them. Azure WebJobs. So we still use a lot of Azure WebJobs, which probably is an unpopular thing to use because functions have kind of crept into the world. It's still probably our #1 most used thing. So we don't like to do obviously Windows services or anything anymore. WebJobs at the time, functions didn't exist, and WebJobs were built into App Service, and kind of just was a natural fit for us to start using them. And we've automated just hundreds of processes with it. So we use them with everything from service bus queue triggers, timer triggers, I mean, it's just helped us tremendously. So kind of leads into the next thing there, right? We started using Service Bus and Azure Storage, and we started doing more of an event-driven architecture. And we didn't even realize it at the time, but we started, the process of decoupling some of our applications by using Service Bus, being like, hey, what if we just post an event here and have, your application listen for it? None of us were really like that smart in architecture at the time to really see, what this was going to turn into, but it leads into, where we're at now. And then SignalR. So we're a logistics company with a lot of different tracking boards, load boards. People need to know like where shipments are at, and they need tracking data in real time. SignalR, I don't know if you guys have used SignalR. If not, I highly recommend it. It is a little bit hard to get fine-tuned so that it doesn't eat up all of your resources. We learned that the hard way, but it's for data that you need in real time. Highly recommend that, and it helped us be able to deliver those results to the business. Some productivity barriers and then solutions, right? So we had a single Team Foundation version control repo, and centralized repository was not very good. So like I said, we had to get change sets through dev all the way to prod, and developers would check in their code all the time and not necessarily have any intention of that going out to prod right away. So you can imagine other developers are getting in there, pulling latest, and they're working on top of code that is not going out. So we had a release manager. It was me, and I was a manual build server for 2 years. I say that with some pride. So it wasn't very pleasant. I was manually cherry picking change sets all day long for the things that we needed to get out to prod, and I'd say 2 out of 3 times there would always be a conflict because the code that it was built on didn't exist yet in the next branch. So it was a mess, especially when we kept growing the amount of developers, but I was kind of the single point of failure to things not getting out on time because I couldn't finish doing finishing a merge conflict. I was the one actually resolving the merge conflicts and not the developers who wrote the code. So that obviously introduced a lot of other risk, and there would be QA finding issues in our other environments. So anyways, that was just, right, big productivity barrier. Also TFVC, if you're not familiar with it, each of the branches were kind of like they were actually taking up space. So it wasn't like GitHub behind the scenes. It has its little database that manages the change through all the different branches. It was actually like this big, huge branch that they had to keep. So at one point we had, like 12 different TFVC branches with different features going on. They were all like 25 gigs, so we had developers like running out of space on their computer and just all sorts of other issues. Also, a big monolith solution. Like I said, we had everything in a giant solution. I think at one point I got up to 88 projects in the solution, and all these teams depended on a lot of these different libraries that had all the business logic in them, and we're like, how do we make that better, right? So here were some of our solutions. Git, obviously everybody in here probably uses Git and is familiar with it, but just doing that was huge for us. But it was also a big mentality shift in there. So the people that worked with the company for a couple of years, not all of them were familiar with Git, and it was one of those things that it seemed like a no-brainer to get to, but it did disrupt productivity for a while because people couldn't check in changes quite as fast. And now looking back at it, it seems silly that it took us so long, but we're there. CI/CD pipelines. Like I said, there was a workshop that we went to a couple of years ago and kind of sparked some light bulbs, and we started using CI/CD pipelines at first just for our monolithic solution that we had, and even that was better though than having to we still couldn't deploy until after 9 p.m. because our app was it was very stateful, and we would kick customers off if we deployed in the middle of the day. But they didn't need me there at night anymore to be, right-clicking in the solution and publishing and doing all this stuff. So I could finally schedule builds to go out and releases to go out. And also, there were sometimes we had some test projects as part of that monolith solution. We had some developers that, they liked not including all the projects sometimes, right? And they would forget to re-include it, so they would build, and my build, works, and then it doesn't for the next person. So, right, a lot of truth to having a build server and having CI set up. Redgate DLM, touched on that a little bit earlier, but again, that was a lifesaver for us so that our database guys, same thing. We didn't want to have our code, it was for a little bit where we would deploy code with the pipeline and then we would have to have a database guy online to do his deploy manually, and that just didn't seem right. So we worked with Redgate a lot on trying to get that built in, and we still use it today. Internal NuGet feeds, this was huge as well. So, decentralizing all of those libraries, or I guess decoupling them from the monolith. We had our different cross-cutting libraries. We actually made kind of a logging NuGet package, and overall, that was a really big success as well. So those are kind of some of those solutions to how we scaled and leveraged some of these DevOps practices. So then we started trying to figure out how to do this cool thing called microservices, because we were like, okay, nothing else is going to get built inside of this monolith anymore. We all decided that it was unmanageable. We had about 30 people, and we did decide on an architecture that kind of worked for us. So we were going to use .NET Core. It was the latest, greatest thing. I think it was still like 1.1. We were going to do Angular front ends. Function apps, we're done with WebJobs, and then also, let's make things stateless. Let's be able to deploy quicker. Let's stop doing these evening deployments. And then one of the questionable decisions that we did, and we're past it now, but I have to bring it up, rolling our own identity server. I don't know how we actually came to that conclusion. I think it was more of a POC, one of those POCs that just magically go into production and then everybody starts using it. But it's working well now. We have all of our APIs and all of our websites, using it. But for anybody that's thinking about it or anybody that's done it, right, rolling your own single sign-on system is a lot more work than it seems. Even when you, have like this awesome blog post out there that tells you exactly how to do it, there's usually a little bit more to it, right? And then SQL Azure. So for all of our new services we were creating, we were going to create their own database if it wasn't dependent on something that absolutely needed to pull data from our giant database. And when I say giant database, our database that we had and have over 1,000 stored procedures, probably anywhere between 500-600 tables in it. Lots of data, So it wasn't hard. It wasn't easy to just say, hey, let's create a new database for this, because sometimes it was a little bit redundant. It's like, we already have that data. Why are we going to create a new database? But it's again another one of those growing pains. You have to start somewhere. Let's see. We also started doing branching strategies. So again, this is another one of those things that it's not popular with everyone, and there's better ways to do it. But what we started doing is we still had manual QA. We still have it today, and we had it back then. And the business wasn't ready to change, their process to say, hey, go write thousands of unit tests, and we're going to be able to push the prod right away, right? We have QA, so we have to figure out how do we make them more valuable. And what we did is we enabled them to start utilizing things like infrastructure as code to be able to build their own test environments, right? Help them to understand what the environment actually looks like in prod. Help them to understand how things like Key Vault work. How to actually manage the app settings and the configurations, so that they're more in charge of being, I guess, that subject matter expert for their team, right? We empower all of our developers to learn this as well, but we kind of want QA to be the subject matter experts because it just gives them a little bit more responsibility. And yeah, I mean it's worked out great. It's nobody's stepping on each other's toes anymore, and again, right, with Azure, we wouldn't have been able to do this before. So we're able to create, some policies around it that automatically tear down these environments in Azure to minimize costs, and they only take about, I'd say, 2-3 minutes to spin up, and they even get their whole own database because we're using SQL Azure for the most part now. So it's really easy to just, copy over an existing database for these test environments. So anyways, that's just something to touch on. Is feature branching for us works, and I think it's really everybody has their own ways that they like doing their branching, but yeah, it worked great. So where we're at now, a little bit, just kind of to show the journey. So we have 65 people in our technology department, over 100 Git repositories. I know that probably seems like, hey, maybe you went a little too granular with it. We store all of our infrastructure as code in different repositories as well to kind of manage that, so that number looks a little inflated. 70 build and release pipelines. Again, right, we have build and release pipelines for things like internal NuGet feeds and stuff, so it's not all applications that go out, but a lot of them do have activity on them, so you know, we don't have to worry about all this manual processes anymore. I think this is the next stat is the best one I'm most proud of. We used to only do deploys maybe once a week, once a month, and they would be huge. Like sometimes we would have the whole team come in on weekends, and lots of risk involved, right? Huge amounts of database changes. We could only do it after 9 p.m. to now we're doing 10 to 15 times daily. We're pushing to prod on all of our different services. So pretty awesome to see where we've come in the past 5 years. 176 app services. I don't know that I would really brag about that one, but you know, we're using it heavily, I guess is the point. 38 function apps and Azure SQL databases. As you can see, we've created a lot. So we're in the process even right now, getting ahead of myself. We're in the process now of trying to move to SQL Azure. So kind of resonating with the talk from earlier a little bit. We have, you know, right now all of our SQL databases are on VMs in Azure, and you know, they're all IaaS. Heavy cost, very, very heavy cost. So, you know, it is by far our most expensive service, and for us to have like proper high availability and everything, we're just going to try and leverage SQL Azure a little bit more, especially since, you know, we can profile using things like Azure Data Studio, and you know, yeah, our DBAs are freaking out a little bit because they don't have that control that they want. But we also have some of them that know, you know, for us right now, in order to get to the next cool things that we're doing, it's a giant cost savings effort for us to do that, and also it gets us away from some of the network constraints we have. So, you know, we have this point-to-site VPN that we have spun up to be able to remote into these VMs, and it's just, there's a lot to it. So not many people understand how it really works. Security, we you know, Azure in general, one of the things that we've learned is try and do the security up front because it's always harder to implement it after. So we're doing Key Vault pretty heavily now using the managed service identity. They've made it, you know, much better than it was. Key Vault at one point, you know, you had to check in. You had to check in like a secret or you know, something to source control to be able to connect to it, which kind of defeated the purpose in my opinion. So now that you can actually kind of use the managed identity of like your app services in Azure and say, hey, Key Vault, right? You know, this person this has access to it. It's been great. We've started getting all of our, you know, connection strings that before all of our developers could see, you know, connection strings to different environments, including prod. We've gotten that, you know, taken care of, so we can sleep a little bit safer. And then getting costs under control. I won't state the exact number, but just in the past month, 2 months, we've looked at it. We've saved thousands by just going back and figuring out what didn't we scale properly? You know, what didn't we have auto scale set up on? Right, Cosmos DB. You're built on throughput, in case anybody didn't know. And we've learned some of these lessons the hard way. So yeah, we're going back through and we're like, you know, fine tuning all of this stuff, and it's amazing, you know, how many zeros you can shave off by looking at this stuff.
Quick question. Are you changing the way that you use Cosmos, or are you backing away from using it altogether?
Changing the way that we're using it. So we're actually using Cosmos heavily for logs. So whenever in the freight world, they're using a lot of XML still, and what we do is on every like request and response we receive, we're actually getting XML back, and we needed a good place to store that, and we wanted it to be quick, so we used Cosmos. We created a nice little UI for people to look at these logs. We didn't put very much criteria around people searching on these logs. So we had people pulling back hundreds of thousands of rows every time that were completely unnecessary, right? We didn't really realize how the billing worked before we just jumped into this new service that was really easy to use. So actually it was at Ignite a couple of months ago. I went to a session on it and I'm like, wow, like there's a lot of tools out there to help me figure out exactly what my throughput should be for all this stuff. So helped a lot. See, backups and storage. That was another huge thing that we saved a lot of cost on by, you know, fine-tuning our backup policy. We were storing backups for way longer than we would ever need, and yeah. What we're working on now, so AKS and Docker, obviously, I think they're kind of the hot thing for everybody to focus on right now. But we are trying to, have our teams own their applications a little bit more by, encouraging them to use Docker. We had one team that wanted to use .NET Core 3.1, right? And at the time they wanted to use it, app services weren't supporting it yet, but they had already checked that in, pushed it out, right? The pipeline pushed it out. That creates some problems. So if they were using a container, right, they could have updated their container first and kind of mitigated that risk a little bit, versus it getting released and then yeah. So again, things like that we're trying to work on, but it's very new to us. API gateways. So we started making sure that all of our database connections are going through APIs. We at one point, those 100-some app services you saw, we had over 100 of them directly talking to our database, which it was incredibly hard to manage, and troubleshoot. So we're like, hey, let's try and create a better architecture here and minimize this. And now it's API gateways to help us with throttling and just we do have a lot of customers now that do API integrations with us as well. So dev test subscription. This is a great one that if any of you guys are using Azure and didn't know about this, we didn't know about it for like 2 years. Dev test subscription. If you use app services, they're about 40% cheaper using them in the dev test subscription. We have a lot of app services and a lot of app service plans, and so we started shifting that stuff over. And again, like those couple of thousands I was talking about, just by moving that over, right? I mean, made management very happy. Unit test coverage, we're obviously always working on that, but that's something we have to focus on a little bit more so that we can let our QA be a little bit more valuable and less manual. And then infrastructure as code. So if you guys have used ARM templates in here, ARM templates are kind of, I guess some people like them. You're always going to have the latest features on them, but Terraform is so much nicer to read. And when I'm teaching other people in the office how to use Terraform, they look at it and they're just like, man, this is really simple. It's really, really easy to use. And then what you can't do in Terraform, you can, call an ARM template from it. So I don't know. I've loved Terraform, and since we've started adopting it, we've gotten a lot more interest in it. So just something to keep in consideration. And I think Azure DevOps or whatever pipeline you're using, Terraform has a lot of really good extensions in there now to help you use that in your pipelines. It's pretty much all I got. Kind of wanted to go through this quick in case anybody had questions, but yeah, I mean, we just started leveraging a lot of those services to help us, meet customer demand, and then breaking off into teams, I think, was the biggest part. Azure allowed us to break into, I want to say we have eight teams now. It allows all of these teams to still get their work done without having to come to me for everything now, after we started leveling people up on how to use things like, infrastructure as code, and also just, like feature branching environments and things like that. So come a long way, but I hope maybe, you guys got a little bit out of this and helps you with some issues you might have. So that's pretty much all I got.
Do you have like ops guys or infrastructure guys, or have they used your team?
My team is me, pretty much. So like I said, I'm kind of, I'm really the only like DevOps guy there. That's why I said, it's not really a position. There are times where I become like this single bottleneck for, hey, I need an environment built and it's a new environment that we've never done before. An example of that is, we started learning, hey, let's stop creating an app service plan for things like Angular front ends, right? We can host those in blob storage, static content. It's cheap. So the first time we do that for somebody, right, I don't expect them to necessarily drop everything they're doing for a couple hours or a day or whatever and figure that out. I can usually figure it out a little bit quicker and then teach them right after. So that's kind of my role now, but that's what we're doing. Now as far as Terraform goes, I do encourage teams to kind of like, in the dev test subscription, they have access to provision things now. So I'm encouraging them to get out there and, hey, play around in this. And, with MSDN licenses, you have credits per month that you can go around and play out there. So
do the developers watch production?
For the most part, right now they still do, yeah. Application insights and stuff, we have a lot of alerts out there. I can't believe I didn't mention that in here, but application insights was huge. And we look at that every day, and a lot of times when we're having performance issues, like I said before, we use stored procs for everything, and it's very, very easy, even using application insights, to trace back the stored procs without even profiling from SQL. It's really, really easy for us to tell, like, hey, what's causing issues here?
Are do you do for cost management?
For cost management?
Yeah.
Now we're actually just using their cost analysis that they have in the portal. So it's gotten way better. Yeah, I mean, we actually look a lot of times. We look month by month. We see the services in there, but yeah, I mean, I can't really elaborate on it too much more than that. Since they've upgraded it, it's been a lot better. Before we had a lot of things that we actually almost did by hand and kept in spreadsheets to try and figure out, like, hey, what's our estimated cost on this going to be? Any other questions? If not, that's all I got.